afternoon already. In this talk, which I titled Religion in the City, the case of Mատենադարան and its gospel books, I'm going to present this part of my research, perhaps the only part of my research which I am doing in Armenia on religious issues, which fits to this larger topic of religion in the city, of urban religion. So, urban religion, or in other words, religion as it is lived, practiced, promoted, or contested in towns and cities, has recently become a growing and increasingly important research area, explored by anthropologists, sociologists, and students of other disciplines. In the South Caucasus context, the 2021 special issue of New Diversities Journal on urban religious pluralization offers an excellent collection of papers dealing with various instances of religious presence in the cities of Azerbaijan and Georgia. As for Armenia, a decade-older chapter by Levon Abrahamian, entitled Yerevan Sakra, presents an illuminating discussion of several religious or formerly religious places in the city center. However, in today's talk, I am looking for religious life where it is rarely searched by students of urban religion, and namely in a museum and research institute space. This museum and research center is the Mատենադարան, or the Mesrop Mashtots Institute of Ancient Manuscripts, one of the most famous landmarks of Yerevan. The Mատենադարան holds the world's largest collection of Armenian manuscript and early printed books, scrolls, and documents, the majority of which are gospel books and other religious texts. Within this secular scientific space, created in Soviet times, these religious texts became precious pieces of tangible national heritage, to be protected, renovated, studied, and displayed as objects that exemplify Armenian unique artistic and literary tradition. However, a few of the gospel books have preserved their religious significance and been venerated as powerful sacred objects both within the walls of the Mատենադարան and during religious feasts of the Armenian Apostolic Church, for which they are temporarily released from the institute. So, drawing on recent literature on material religion and museum studies, I will now examine such gospel books and the ways they relate to people who believe in their power and approach them with their prayers and requests. First, however, I need to briefly explain the role the gospel books play in Armenian Christianity. According to the Armenian church tradition, the Bible was the first book translated into Armenian with the use of the native alphabet, created specifically for this purpose. Gospel books quickly became an important part of a busy network of creative activity and exchange of material and spiritual goods in Armenian Christian religious economy. The tradition of a votive offering of gospel books developed early, and those who commissioned them hoped that reading from these texts during religious rituals would help them to attain salvation. Furthermore, certain manuscripts, and later or printed books, started to be perceived as endowed with miraculous and healing powers. They have come to be worshipped in a comparable way to how other Christians can venerate particular icons or figures of saints. Consequently, the widespread practice in Armenian Christianity has become that all gospel books are powerful, but some of their copies are more powerful than others. Such gospel books were kept in monasteries, churches, and in private houses, everywhere attracting pilgrims seeking for their support. After communists took power in Armenia in 1920, thousands of Armenian gospel books and other religious manuscripts, including the central library of the Armenian Church in Echmiadzin, were nationalized and secularized by the Soviet state. Starting from the late 1950s, their new home became the Mատենադարան, combining the functions of a central state repository, research center, and a museum. The establishment of the Mատենադարան as the place for Armenian manuscripts was rooted in a larger post-World War II turn to Armenian history, which was placed in the national frame but largely bereft of religious elements and integrated instead with official Soviet ideology. In this new context, the gospel books that had been earlier venerated as miraculous objects were cut out of their history as divine agents and detached from the cultural context in which they could act and perform their religious deeds and duties. More precisely, they were turned into objects of the utmost cultural value, meant to be cherished for their artistic quality, as source of historical knowledge, and as survivors from the past, witnesses to the centuries-long creativity and endurance of the Armenian people. With this shift in meaning, coming to the Mատենադարան became for many Armenians a kind of pilgrimage to the shrine of national culture. However, as Andre Bakker observes, the disenchantment of religious objects in the process of their heritageization and museumification produces, I quote, an indelible source of tension, for it is never fully accomplished, end of quote. Similarly, there is no way any museum can stop visitors from bringing their devotional baggage, as Steph Burns calls it, with them and approaching displayed objects with prayers, pious gestures, and offerings. Hence, these artifacts can be objects of both cultural use and cultural use. The Mատենադարան is one such museum where religious life pulsates under the secular and scientific surface. For some Armenians, the Institute is not only a treasury of national culture, but also a pilgrimage site and a shrine in the religious sense. Consequently, even in communist times, they visited it to pray and come as close as possible to the books which they considered powerful and miraculous. For example, Helen Evans, an American art historian, recalled the following scene from her early 1980s research stay in the Institute. I quote, "On one day, a man came into the room with a Mատենադարան staffer to be shown one of the manuscripts. Rather than opening it, he venerated the closed book. As I remember it, he raised the book to his face and kissed it several times. The Mատենադարան staffers in the Soviet era, when religion was discouraged, were embarrassed that I was seeing the work treated as a religious object. They encouraged the man to open it and look at the content, but he refused. After venerating it, he left, and the Mատենադարան staff relaxed." End of quote. Towards the end of the Soviet era, another Western visitor to the Mատենադարան, John Grepin, reported a similar occurrence, which, however, was met with quite a different reaction of the Institute's employees. In his words, I quote again, "Three middle-aged peasants came to Yerevan to visit relatives and to see their Bible. They brought flowers with them, and these they presented to the Bible, which was brought from the vault and shown to them with dignity by the understanding staff of the Mատենադարան." End of quote. During my fieldwork, I heard many similar stories from the Mատենադարան employees. They recalled people coming to the Institute to pray, bringing sick persons with them, and making votive offerings, as they would do it in a shrine. Most of the stories were related to the so-called Shurishkan Gospels, which you can see now on a picture. This late 15th century manuscript, brought to the Mատենադարան in the 1970s by Armenian from Iran, is arguably the most venerated book in today's Armenia. As one such story I heard goes, I quote, "Once an Armenian woman came here and told me that as a child, when she still lived with her parents in Iran, she was mute. Then they heard about the Shurishkan Gospels. They rented a house next to the place where the book was kept, and she took care of it day and night for a whole year. Finally, God listened to her prayers. She did not only start to speak, but got married, gave birth to children, and moved to Europe. One day, she saw in a dream that the book is surrounded by darkness. This is why she traveled all the way from Europe as a pilgrim to the Gospels. She asked me to show her the book. When I entered the door, she went first, made a few steps, and stopped right in the front of it. I explained to her, but we keep all manuscripts in the dark room for the sake of their protection, because the light can harm them. She accepted this explanation and then took a golden chain with a cross from her neck and placed it on a cover. She asked me to keep it there for at least a few days. And she cursed anyone who would dare to steal it. End of the story. First kept in the Institute's repository, as in this story, it was said, the Shurishkan Gospels had been on display in the Museum of the Mատենադարան since 2011. The decision to place the book in the exhibition was meant to facilitate access for pilgrims. However, its relocation from one hall to another indicated that the Mատենադարան had difficulty finding a proper place for it. In the beginning, the Shurishkan Gospels stayed in a room on the museum's first floor. There, during one of my visits, I saw how an Armenian family persuaded a museum guard to open the glass display case, touched the manuscript with great reverence, and placed photographs of a young soldier and other family members beneath its cover. Perhaps to suppress such an unauthorized access and contact, the book was subsequently moved to one of the central exhibition halls. However, not only pilgrims, both city dwellers and people from other parts of the country or abroad are coming to the Mատենադարան for religious reasons. Besides them, also some staff members of the Institute approach the Shurishkan Gospels and other Gospel books with their prayers, problems, and requests. As one of them told me, when we have work to do or we need protection, we take a Gospel, kiss it, pray, and go. Whoever has faith does so. The most striking story I heard about a Gospel book revealing its miraculous power in the Mատենադարան is about a manuscript brought some years ago to the Institute for renovation. I quote, "We sometimes put photographs inside Gospel books when someone has a problem or is ill. One day, someone brought photos and asked to put them in the Shurishkan. We were too lazy to go to the exhibition hall, so we placed them in a Gospel that we had here. We knew nothing about this book. But then it turned out that all the wishes of the family came true. More and more people were bringing us photos or were coming here and asking, 'Can we place our picture in that Gospel?' Sometimes they were even choosing which page to put their photos on. 'Put me next to the illustration of Christ, please.' Others were bringing letters or were simply coming to pray and kiss the book. There were so many pictures that we couldn't even recognize all these people. But after some time, one of our colleagues had a dream. The Gospel said to her that it could not bear so many requests. So we took all the pictures from the book. Perhaps the Gospel was right, because really many people were coming from all around. When we told the owner about everything that happened, he said, 'Of course, didn't you know that this is a miraculous Gospel?' End of the story. As the above examples show, the Mատենադարան is, despite its official secular and scientific character, a place where people pray and miracles can happen. Some books permanently or temporarily located in the Institute resist their secularization, acting according to their religious roles, responding to people's requests, and contacting them in dreams. The repertoire of Armenian Christian practices in the Mատենադարան includes praying, touching or kissing the books, and offering ex votos to them. In his study of religious objects at museum displays, Crispin Payne observes that, I quote, common must be instances of people who pray, leave offerings, kiss icons or the like against the museum's rule. More uncommon, however, are situations like the one which I'm going to discuss now. Namely, in the case of the Mատենադարան, some gospel books live their religious lives not only within the institute premises, but they also temporarily leave its walls and participate in religious feasts of the Armenian Church. This custom started in the early 2000s with the Shurishkan Gospels being taken for one day a year to St. George Church in Muhni, some 20 kilometers northwest from Yerevan. More recently, up to 5 gospel books were allowed to leave the institute for religious reasons and spend a day in a church. 2 of them have been taken to churches in Yerevan city center, and I will focus now on them. The first is the so-called Zoravor Gospels. It is taken on the 14th of May, the commemoration day of Moses Tatevatsi, to the Church of the Holy Mother of God. In Armenian, Zoravor means powerful, the name which clearly indicates the supernatural abilities of the manuscript. The Church of the Holy Mother of God is also popularly known as Zoravor. It received its name from this gospel book, which was kept there in the early 18th to the early 20th century. The other manuscript, an unnamed gospel book, visits the Church of Saint Sarkis during the feast dedicated to this saint, celebrated in January or February. This 17th century book was copied in the monastery located where St. Sarkis Church stands now. The feasts in which these gospel books participate share a similar scenario. In the morning, a priest comes to the Mատենադարան. He receives a book and usually says a short prayer. It is not uncommon that a group of believers gathers in front of the building in order to kiss and touch the book. From there, the book is transported to the church. The illustrations you can see now all show the feasts in the Zoravor church. First, the book enters the church territory in a solemn procession. Before it is taken inside, a priest uses the book to offer the blessing of the 4 corners of the world. Inside the church, the book is installed on the altar where it stays during the liturgy. After the liturgy is over, it is placed in front of the altar so that the feast participants can come close and venerate it. Waiting in a long line, most of them approach the book once, but the most zealous return several times. They stop for a while in front of the book, pray, touch it with their hands or foreheads, and kiss it. Many bring with them different objects, such as scarves and handkerchiefs, prayer books, necklaces, or pictures of those in need, and rub them against the book cover. Sometimes they also leave votive offerings. Among pilgrims, it is not difficult to spot the sick and disabled who come in the hope of being cured. So as this short description and pictures show, the feasts in which gospel books from the Mատենադարան participate are occasions for religious gatherings when the faithful seek access to divine power. In turn, the pilgrim's presence and acts of devotion allow the books to resume, at least for a short time, their religious functions. Zoravor Gospels plays the central role in the feast for which it is released from the Mատենադարան, and for many participants, its presence is the main incentive to come. As one of them explained it briefly and to the point, this is a powerful book, and I am here today to receive a whit of this power. The considerable popularity of these and other feasts in which the gospel books from the Mատենադարան participate indicate that this recent initiative falls on a fertile ground. It combines liturgy and other elements of Christianity, as officially prescribed by the Armenian Apostolic Church, with religiosity as practiced by many Armenian Christians who approach the gospel books not so much as religious texts, but as sacred objects endowed with miraculous powers. together with a veneration of the Shurishkan Gospels and some other Gospel books received in the Matenadaran, such feasts form an important element of Yerevan's religious landscape. Besides of being an interesting ethnographic example of religion as it exists in a rather unexpected way in an urban space, the case of the Matenadaran and its Gospel books bring together two fields of research that, despite the recent developments and many points of convergence, remains surprisingly disconnected, and namely studies on urban religion on the one hand and studies on religion in museums on the other hand. Furthermore, the discussed case of religious sacralization of Gospel books as miraculous objects and their secularization as national heritage shows that the two processes do not have to be mutually exclusive. Instead, it reveals a more complex interrelations which questions clear-cut divisions between religious and secular spheres. Thank you for listening.